30 years ago today, on October 4th, 1995, the very first episode of Neon Genesis Evangelion premiered on Japanese television. And over the past couple of weeks, I've been rewatching this series. It is one of my personal favorite anime series and one of my personal favorite series of all time. So today, I want to give a little bit of a retrospective, talk about my love for this series, all the things it does incredibly well, how it has kind of stood the test of time, and generally what it is like watching it 30 years after it premiered. Before I dive into all of that though, please do leave a like on this video and subscribe if you're a fan of Mecha anime content and want to see plenty more videos like this in the future. Also, head on down to the comments section below. I want to hear your thoughts on Neon Genesis Evangelion. What do you think of this series? What are some of your favorite episodes, some of your favorite moments, some of your favorite characters, some of your favorite Evangelion units? Let me know all that down in the comments section below. Now, I think it is very safe to say that Neon Genesis Evangelion has absolutely stood the test of time 30 years later, because this is a series that is still loved to this day. It is still talked about. It is still in the pop culture sphere. It has influenced so much stuff, even outside of anime. There's so many like more adult animated shows, cartoon shows, particularly things on like Cartoon Network that have referenced Evangelion. There's so much out there that has drawn inspiration and also kind of shown direct references to this series that it is hard to deny that, yes, 30 years later, this is absolutely still a relevant series. It is something that still brings people together, still connects with people all these years later. And in terms of my personal experience, I didn't watch this until 2019. This was actually one of my first anime series that I watched. I watched the original 2003 Full Metal Alchemist series and then Neon Genesis Evangelion. I think this is really the series that truly got me into anime for many reasons, really. Of course, one, because it was one of the first ones that I watched. Also, it's got giant robots in it. I've always been a big fan of giant robots. Transformers is something that I grew up on, and that is very near and dear to my heart. So just the concept of giant robots has always kind of stuck out to me. And yeah, this series is one that really showed me what anime can be, but also it is one of the series that really showed me what storytelling could do. Sometimes you watch those things when you're younger, or maybe in your adult life, that change your perspective on what a medium can do for you, like emotionally or in terms of storytelling. And Evangelion was definitely one of those series, because there's really nothing like this series that is out there. Of course, since the series released, there's plenty of things that have drawn inspiration from it, maybe tried to kind of be a bit of a clone of it in many ways, but I don't think there's anything that truly has captured the heart and soul of this series. Truly feels like a vision from a singular person in the way that this series does. Again, there's nothing like Evangelion. And of course, there are a great many things that make this series stand out compared to everything else, not only within the mecha genre, but within anime in general, whether it's your group of characters, whether it is the visuals, the kind of visual inspiration, and a lot of like the themes that are then tied into certain imagery. Also, the story itself is quite unique. The way that it presents a lot of things, particularly like the last two episodes and the introspective nature that it has, it very much goes balls to the wall in some ways, in a way that just doesn't feel like what your typical mecha anime would do, but also what your typical blockbuster type of show would do. When you think of a mecha series, you would not think of the kind of directions that this series in particular goes in, and just the way that it's not really about the robots. Now, most good mecha anime is never really about the robots, that is just more of a backdrop, but I think with this series in particular, you could probably take the robots out of it and a lot in terms of character and in terms of story would not change hugely. Essentially, the robots are a plot device in many ways, but you could kind of switch that out for anything else. Ultimately, this is a series that is about just really broken people trying to find love, trying to find a place in the world, trying to find what makes them happy. It's a really beautiful series in that regard, but it's also incredibly dark and incredibly tragic as well. I think the most interesting part about the group of characters in this series is that none of them are overly likable, but also they are characters that you very much connect with, you very much get to fully understand the machinations of their mind and everything they've gone through, how they think, like their entire thought process. You really dig deep into pretty much every single character in this series, but particularly your main trio of Shinji, Rei, and Asuka, and then also Misato as well. I feel like they're the four main characters where you really get to dig deep into their backstory, their trauma, their history, all the stuff that they've gone through and how it's informed the decisions that they make. And of course, at the center of that is Shinji Ikari, our lead protagonist here, who over the years, many people have said that he's a terrible character and he just whines and he's so hard to watch. But I think that's what makes makes him such a great character. He feels so realistic for a teenager that has major parental issues, that is just looking for love in life, not in terms of a romantic sense, but just in terms of, trying to feel something. That's essentially what Shinji is looking for throughout this series, and the things that you put him through, or things that the writers in particular do put him through in this series, it is completely understandable the kind of reactions he has. Now, you could like sit there and say, oh, he's whining, you should just like, suck it up and all this kind of stuff when he's, running off from Nerve and refusing to pilot the Ava anymore. But when you look at the things that he goes through in order to get to that point, he is watching, for example, the Ava being controlled to almost kill his friend, and he just sat there in the cockpit. He can't do anything about it. And after that, of course, he then tries to leave Nerve. That is an understandable reaction for like a 14 to 15-year-old, however old Shinji is in this series. And I feel like people often forget that. And that's one of the great things about Evangelion, but also the original Mobile Suit Gundam series as well, is that it fully understands the kind of reaction that a child would have to being put in these situations. Where most of the time in fiction, we see, older characters or people that are more well trained to be in these kind of roles, and therefore there's an element of fiction to them where they don't quite react in normal ways to these type of things. They just still carry on, even though they go through some horrendous things. But I love Evangelion for the reason of there is genuine human reactions from everyone. And even the characters that I really don't like, there is a totally thought out, well written reason for why those characters act in that way. Take Asuka, for example. I hate Asuka. I've always hated it. I cannot get round that hatred for her. I know a lot of people love her, but I've never been able to like her. Just because she's really irritating, she's just mean to everyone. But at the same time, when you look at her backstory and how tragic she is, you kind of get her personality. It doesn't make me like the character, but it makes me understand the character. Again, even though I don't particularly like her, I care about her because I understand her. I understand what she's been through, how that's informed the way that she acts now. And that's probably the best thing about Evangelion, is that it truly understands breaking down characters, not necessarily making them likable to the audience, but making them understood by the audience. In terms of the writing of Evangelion, outside of the characters and how well written, in my opinion, they are, I think one of the things I really appreciate about Evangelion is how well written the twists are, or the big reveals concerning certain things. Now, for those that haven't seen Evangelion before, this video will kind of contain some spoilers, but I won't divulge this very specific detail. But there is stuff revealed about what the Avas are, how that ties into the Angels, and how that ties into some of our characters. And I obviously knew like that twist stuff because I have watched the series a couple of times before. So going into this, I was able to pick up on more of the kind of subtle foreshadowing that there is, concerning, even like the first launch of the Ava and Shinji first getting into the plug. There's a certain phrasing that Shinji uses in terms of the feeling of being in this thing that very much informs the big twist surrounding what the Avas are. It's so well done because it's a line that you would never really pick up on and think, oh, that's got something to do with what the Ava actually is. No, it's kind of a passing line and it's just describing the feeling, but it basically reveals the twist. That's like the best kind of writing for foreshadowing, where you can look back at it and see that specific moment so early on basically tells you this particular twist. And again, I think it's just masterful writing. The actual twists and reveals in this series as well are fantastic, because there really is no thing out there that exists that has these kind of twists or reveals within this particular kind of series. Again, this is a series about kids piloting giant robots. You would not expect the kind of reveals surrounding what these giant robots are to be in a series that is initially pitched as this. Now, in like some weird, obscure indie film that's really art housey in that, sure, maybe these kind of twists you would come to expect in there because of the type of thing it is. Evangelion's so great because in many ways it does feel like a mainstream kind of blockbuster type of series, but at the same time, it's so independent and art house, and that's just really cool. The way it manages to blend those two things, where again, it has hit that massive pop culture zeitgeist and it is incredibly popular and is, I want to say it's kind of mainstream in many ways. Like, this is a very, very well-known anime series. It's certainly not a niche, and I feel like most people that are into anime have probably watched this series out of any mecha series, and it's the least mecha-y of the mecha series that exist. You know what else I really love about Evangelion though? The vibes. And it's one of those strange things where it's like, no, it's nothing about the writing, it's nothing even about the visual storytelling, it is just simply the vibes. This series truly manages to capture that mid-90s aesthetic, but also something that you can watch on a late night and feel weird comfort in it. As uncomfortable as this series is to watch at many points, it is also very comforting to watch at many points. Take, for example, I don't know, going through a city at night, driving. Or, like, for example, like episode 4, when Shinji first walks away from the Ava and he's kind of just roaming around town, sits in a movie theater. There's just kind of vibes to that that made me feel weirdly comfortable because it does feel like that nightlife kind of aesthetic. And it's very quiet at points as this series. There's so much nowadays that is so bombastic and always moving in terms of storytelling, but I love that Evangelion just has these quiet moments of not really anything going on. It will linger on a shot for maybe far too long than it should. And a lot of filmmakers, a lot of storytellers nowadays, just because of like deteriorating attention spans, they won't sit on a shot for too long. Or because of trying to get this super tight runtime of a series, an episode, a movie, whatever it may be. But Evangelion never does that. Of course, it still manages to fit into the typical time slot that you would expect, but it's not afraid to just linger on a shot for too long. A lot of people talk about the shot of Misato and Kaji when they're sleeping together, and it's just this shot that lingers on one single bit of the room where you can't even see them, but you just have the noise in the background. I appreciate that it just sits on that shot for like a solid minute. Despite how different this series is to any other within the genre, this is still a mecha anime. There are still giant robots in here. Take like the first couple of episodes, for example, that first fight with the Ava and the Angel. It's great. It truly has aura to it, which I know everyone loves nowadays when it comes to anime. Everyone loves hype moments and aura, and Evangelion has that. That first battle, I think, is fantastic. But when it comes to like episode 19 with the big reveal of the Ava, and an episode that really stuck with me in terms of its horrifying visuals that it has, again, that's a really awesome fight, and the way that it builds up to it absolutely gets me hyped. But at the same time, it absolutely terrifies me just because of the shots that are used in there, the way that the Ava is presented. Really cool, but also really terrifying. And there's just great action sequences in this series involving the Avas, involving the Angels. They do some interesting things with the Angels as well, because all of them kind of have like a different power slash move set, so no two fights with the Angels feel the same. And speaking of, I really enjoy one thing about this series, which is the way that it focuses on like the tactical side of stuff. Gundam does it quite a lot, but I think this series does it even more so, where you kind of understand the tactics behind certain plans, and you know, the timing behind stuff, and will this thing actually work? We're putting massive risk into this. There's so much that goes into these things that feel kind of small in the grand scheme of stuff, but you see how much goes into it and the technicalities behind it. And that kind of stuff is really cool. And it maintains like a really heightened sense of tension in every action sequence because you're seeing everything going on in the background. Like people typing away, trying to program stuff, trying to block the Angels out. Stuff like that is really cool, and it adds to the tension of the scene without just showcasing straight up robot action. It actually makes the stuff that's happening in these big computer rooms very, very exciting. Now, I have gushed a lot about this series, and there's very few things that I actually don't like about it. In fact, I don't think there's anything that I straight up dislike. This is still probably my favorite mecha anime series for a great many reasons, which of course I've talked about throughout this video. But of course, there are like kind of hit and miss episodes. There are some that just exist, and I'm like, yeah, that wasn't the greatest episode ever. But they are kind of few and far between. Like, I think that most of the episodes in this series are at least entertaining, usually really good in terms of characterization. There are a couple of episodes that feel a bit repetitive. I think especially when you get to like the last two episodes. Weirdly enough, I hugely respect the direction of going that route, because for those that have seen the series, the last two episodes are just not what you would expect from the end of a mecha anime series. It's not what you would expect from an anime series at all. It feels like the most anticlimactic thing, but also really fits in with the series in a strange way. However, the last two episodes I think are a little bit repetitive, where you don't really need episode 26 or you don't need episode 25. You could have cut one of them and you essentially would have achieved the same results, because episode 26 largely does the same stuff as episode 25. So I think it could have been condensed down into one episode is what I'm trying to say. But even still, I just kind of respect the ending of this series. Again, I don't particularly love it. because it does feel like a big letdown. But I feel like that's why it's so good, is that it goes against the grain, but it still feels very in line with everything the series is trying to do. Because ultimately, this is a series about its characters. It is about exploring the inner workings of Shinji's mind, why he does the things that he does, what he wants out of life, what he wants out of people, what he ultimately thinks of himself, and how he can better himself in life. That is ultimately what this series is about. And the finale of this series absolutely delivers on a finality to that character arc. So overall, in case it wasn't obvious, yes, 30 years later, Evangelion still absolutely does stand the test of time. There really is nothing, even to this day, that exists like this series, even with things that have tried to copy it since. I don't think anything is ever going to be made like this. This is truly like a moment in history that's never going to be repeated in terms of creating a series that looks like it's one thing, but is something totally different, but also delivers on the promise of what this series initially is, whilst also doing a lot of different things with it. It's a very bizarre series that is a whole mishmash of genres and ideas, but feels so consistent. Yeah, there's really nothing like Evangelion. And that's the ultimate statement to have around this series, is that there is nothing in the world that does exist, that has ever existed, or will ever exist like Neon Genesis Evangelion. A perfect 10 out of 10 series? No. But I feel like it's better to have a legacy like you have with this series than to be something that is drop dead perfect, 10 out of 10, no notes, because in many ways that's kind of boring, and Evangelion is certainly not a boring series. So with all that in mind, I'm going to give Neon Genesis Evangelion an A. So those were my thoughts on Neon Genesis Evangelion 30 years later. Before I get out there, please do leave a like on this video and subscribe if you are a fan of mecha anime content and want to see plenty more videos like this in the future. Also, like I did say earlier, head on down to the comment section below. Let me know your thoughts on Neon Genesis Evangelion if you've seen it. I hope that if you watch this video, you have actually already seen the series, because I do talk about some spoilery things in here. But yeah, I want to know all about your favorite characters, favorite AVA units, favorite moments in the series, favorite episodes, all that kind of stuff. Make sure to stay tuned, because I will have plenty more Neon Genesis Evangelion content to come in the future, whether it's tier lists, rankings, videos around the rebuild series. I want to do a video around the manga as well. I haven't actually seen the end of Evangelion before, so I do plan to watch that for the first time, and I'll do a video on that as well. So if you're a fan of Evangelion, absolutely stay tuned to the channel, because I love this series. I want to talk about it more, and since it is the 30th anniversary, this is the best time to do so. Thank you once again for tuning into Mecha Chat today. I'll see you guys next time.